Thank you for tuning into our Ask the Candidate series. We wanted to make sure that you have the information you need to make your voice count on voting day. Thank you so much to Jack Ayoub from the Labor Party for joining me today. So first question for you, Jack. Can you please describe your vision for the future of our electorate?
Well, Laura, I'm very, very pleased to be with you. And I think the future of our electorate can be an incredibly prosperous one. We have a plan in the Labor Party for domestic manufacturing. Our part of the world produces some of the essential minerals and metals that will be needed to go into batteries. I see a future where this region is producing batteries that are stamped with Australian made on the side that we sell around the world. We have a plan to produce more trains, buses and ferries here. I want to see that production happens in our region. But not only that, we have a plan to support agriculture and other matters. It's important to acknowledge that the electorate of Parkes, although it is an agricultural electorate, has a lot of mining. But in Dubbo itself, the largest employer is health services. We've got a plan to better fund Medicare and ensure that health workers are paid adequately, to see that 400,000 TAFE-free TAFE courses happen. So all of these things together, as far as I'm concerned, would mean that the region is growing stronger and faster as we go forward, and that we address the critical question of housing, which is a serious issue in our part of the world.
Thank you. And on that, what key housing issues does your policy specifically address?
Well, look, we have a plan to build 20,000 social and affordable housing properties, 10,000 for frontline workers, an additional 4,000 for women and children fleeing domestic violence. What that'll do is it'll vent the pressure out of the rental market and provide another option for people to get into secure housing. I grew up in a housing commission, not ashamed about it, as did Albo. That's an important step for some people, and it provides that floor in the housing market. So that's critical step number one. The second thing we want to do is actually provide shared equity. Now, a lot of people can, dip into the bank of mum and dad, and that's a great thing. The government have schemes in terms of 5% deposit to avoid the insurance payment question. I used it myself when I bought my little house in Coonabarabran. That's a good thing. We support that. But we also want to provide for a new home 40% of the equity, for an existing home 30% of the equity. And that'll cost about $329 million a year, and it'll be given to 10,000 people every year. So what that'll say is, look, you're a young person, you want to get into the housing market, here's your first step, we're going to help you do it. And as you well know, and others do, the key to having a secure life is getting your hands on a set of keys to a house. So it's a practical intervention that we want to make.
Thank you for sharing that. And what professional experience and history qualifies you to hold a position of national influence?
Look, I grew up in Coonabarabran. I lost my mum at the age of 11 to breast cancer. And not long after that, my father was very badly disabled in a work accident, could no longer work. So went from losing mum to looking after dad. And somewhere along that way, I found music, a deep passion for it, went off to the Sydney Conservatorium and studied opera singing. But not long after I was 18, Dad passed away. Now, that kind of hardship in life gives you a fair bit of toughness, a fair bit of preparedness for the world. But I then went off and studied at the Sydney Conservatorium. I went off to the Royal Military College briefly, although that wasn't ultimately the place I wanted to stay in the world. I did want to execute leadership in some form, but it wasn't in that capacity. And while I was at university, I had the great opportunity to speak with people who'd been fellows at Oxford College and very preeminent barristers around the world, and also hear from elder statesmen of the Labor Party, like Sir John Faulkner, former senator, and others. So for me, it's a question of your passion and your love for this country, but also your deep understanding of the political process. And I think that I have demonstrated that capacity. And I'll add this final point. The work that I do every day with the Australian Workers' Union sees me advocate for people. And that's fundamentally the role of an MP, is advocacy, effective advocacy. And I spend most of my day in the Fair Work Commission advocating for a fair go. So I think my skills are clearly there, and I hope that people trust that.
Thank you for sharing. And what specific benchmarks will you use to determine that your time in office was successful?
Well, look, if I'm lucky enough to be elected on May 21 as the member for Parkes, the key thing for me is over that first 3-year term where I elected, have we addressed the critical areas that I've been speaking about? My belief is that our region more broadly, regional communities, Dubbo and others, are innovative. They know how to sustain themselves. They know how to grow. They simply need the backup. And so what I think would be a great benchmark of my time where I elected as a member for Parks is supporting that innovation, is helping people to see that vision and attain it on the horizon. And those are the critical questions. Yes, we've got to provide grants and we've got to do the on-the-ground work, but it's about where we're going. And if we've got our eyes set on where we're going, I think the MP, the federal member, the state member, the federal member in this case, should drive that vision, should inspire people to that direction. And that's my greatest benchmark for myself.
Thank you. And finally, our electorate deserves to know how you will show moral leadership. Can you describe for me how you would approach a conscience vote by balancing the electorate's voice, your personal values, and your party's values?
This is a good question. I really like this one. And it's a big question, and, we probably don't have time to explore it as much as I would like. But if we use the example of gay marriage, I'm a gay man myself, and yet I had great difficulty with that vote and how that occurred. And was a plebiscite the right direction? Did we adequately consider the rights of religious peoples? There are morally good things to do in the world, and that's one thing. But your role in government, as far as I'm concerned, is the balancing of rights. You can't tip them all one way, you can't tip them all the other. So, on the gay marriage question, I had a personal view which probably didn't align with the majority of the public, despite who I am. The government had a view, my party had a view. And so for me, the question is, how do I, in my own conscience, balance those rights? How do I take on the views of the people in the electorate in determining that balance? And then how do you effectively influence your party to see the balance that you've come to? So, that I hope that's reasonably succinct as best I can say it. But it is fundamentally, I think, the role of an MP and someone who is in a position of leadership to take the bigger picture approach and balance the rights of Australians.
Thank you for explaining that. That's the end of our questions. Thank you so much, Jack, for joining us, and we'll see you around.
It's been a pleasure, Laura.